anybody can start a blog. Anybody can have a podcast. Anybody can have social media accounts. Anybody can do this stuff. And I think it's just a matter of, consistency, which is something, again, that's tough for me and it's tough for everybody. We're all busy. But consistency, and also just, I guess the things that I think about are consistency, simplicity, making sure that you have a very simple message to tell. And this is why I think I resonate so much with Simon's stuff, and why I was so drawn to him at the beginning. And then just taking, I think one other important element of storytelling is to take something that, like, there are no new ideas really, if you think about it, but to take something that we sort of already know or that we hear all the time, and how do we reframe it into a way that we haven't thought of before?
From cave drawings to family histories to stories around the fire, humans crave order among chaos, connection amid isolation. So we tell stories. Our mission at the Storytellers Network is to bring the art of story to the masses. Whether you're in marketing, you're an entrepreneur, or you're developing your own personal brand, telling your story effectively can make the difference between celebrating milestones and collecting unemployment. The Storytellers Network strives to help storytellers tell their stories so you can learn from the best. Now, your host, the inbound evangelist himself, Dan Moyle.
Welcome to the Storytellers Network podcast. I'm so glad you're joining me today for this episode, because today we're taking a little bonus detour. We're taking a detour from the podcast season to hear from a writer, a speaker, a content creator, and an igniter with Simon Sinek's organization. He's actually a co-writer with Simon. He's a coach. He's a speaker and an evangelist of the Start With Why movement. After years of developing content to help Simon share his ideas, David Mead began speaking and facilitating workshops back in 2012 to help shift people's perceptions about leadership and culture. So he went from helping Simon get his content out to becoming the content himself. And today, David shares with the Storytellers Network his storytelling craft, his successes, his stumbles, and he's got a good one, his take on story in our world today. It's awesome, and I can't wait for you to listen to it. Now, real quick, just a friendly reminder, find us online at thestorytellersnetwork.com for more episodes, how to contact us, and for other resources to help you and inspire you to tell your story better and get one of those compelling stories to change the world. And if you like what we're doing here, please consider leaving us a review. It helps us to reach more storytellers. And I'll read a review after the interview. With that said, let's get to the stories. So there you go. So thanks for joining us today, Mr. Mead. I do appreciate you being here, David. Thanks, man.
You got it. Thank you, Dan.
So I like to start off asking folks where they are, because I like to show that you don't have to be somewhere, special to be a storyteller. So where are you geographically?
Well, I don't know if it makes me not a storyteller to not to be here, but I live in Salt Lake City, Utah.
All right. So
and I'm in my home, which is where I get to work when I'm not traveling. So
isn't that nice to be able to work from home like that?
It's great.
I love it, man. Yeah. I like to think, if you're going to go into theater, New York City is like the ultimate, right? If you're going to do movies or TV, it's Hollywood or maybe Georgia now. But for storytellers, we can be anywhere. So being in Utah, I think really proves that. That's cool. So on your bio page, David, you have your own story on Start With Why. You tell a 16-word story. I counted it. It almost feels like a haiku, but it's not. But it's definitely a story. Is that a natural thing to you? Do you consider yourself a storyteller?
It's something that I've learned to do more and more since I've been doing this work. But I certainly did not recognize what you read as being a 16-word almost haiku. So I enjoy it. I know it's something that I want to get better at. But I think, anybody is a storyteller. I think some of us are more conscious of it than others, but I think we all do it to a certain extent.
So if you kind of consider yourself one, you want to get better at it, obviously, is what I heard you say. Where does that start for you? I can think of myself back in like 5th grade, writing poetry and writing stories. So for me, I can think of that. And then professionally, it's, I'm always growing. But did that start young for you, or did you kind of decide that later on?
It's funny that you mentioned that, because I just a couple of weeks ago, I dug out some old journals from when I was a kid. Like, my mom started me writing a journal when I was like 8 years old, right? And last night, so I've been pulling these out and I read them to my 8-year-old son. Because we have story time every night, and we used to read books and whatever. And we got done with the last book we were reading. And I was like, I would need to get to the library. But for now, like, why don't we just look through some of my old journals and some old pictures from when Dad was a kid and all this stuff. And last night, actually read through this story that I wrote that was sort of a rewrite of the Rapunzel story. And it was, so yeah, it started, I mean, for me, and it, it's, that's the first one that I found that was sort of recorded, but it was pretty young. Like, I was about 10 years old when I wrote that.
That's cool. And you rewrote Rapunzel. That's awesome.
Yeah. It was short. It was like 3 or 4 paragraphs, but it was sort of a different take on it.
Do you find that? So I guess I don't want to answer the question by asking it the wrong way. So let me ask this: what is it that you love about story, even when it's just connecting, like with your son? What is it that you love about story?
The thing that I love most about stories is it gets us to feel something. And that's really where connection is made. That's where trust is built. That's where relationships are. I think the foundation of relationships is just through connecting. And so when we can feel something, when we can emote by telling the story or by hearing the story, I think that's really what's so important to me, is it brings people together and it makes things more real.
So is that how you use story in your life now as a coach and a speaker, is to connect? Right.
Yeah. Cause I mean, all the concepts that we talk about are pretty simple and they're easy to understand, but for people who are new to these ideas of, purpose and meaning at work and, creating an environment of trust and cooperation, these are the sort of the basic tenets of the things we talk about. For people who are not in that kind of a work environment, who have not had a job where they have found meaning and purpose, and like they conceptually understand the idea of it, but when we can tell a story of an organization that has done this, or a person who has found meaning or fulfillment in their work, whether that be my own story or somebody else's, it helps people to relate. And they're like, oh yeah, like that makes more sense to me than just if you were to give me a list of facts and figures or some scientific data of how our brain works. All that stuff's interesting, but when we can back it up with story and experience, that's, I think, really where the connection is made.
So you're kind of changing perceptions and changing lives is what I hear you say.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what story changed your life then?
Man, there's probably been a smattering of a whole bunch of stories. I think, if I think back to it, it's really my own story that sort of changed my life. You know what I mean? I was in job after job after job where I just did not feel like I had great leadership. I didn't feel like I had anybody there that really had, I mean, it's not that I didn't like the people that I worked with, but it was a job. Like, we all just showed up to work at the same place every day. It wasn't anything more than that. And then, my meeting Simon Sinek in 2009 is a huge turning point in that story, where all of a sudden I realized that there was a different way. And it's something that I always sort of knew that I wanted. I had just never found it. And so I was able to, to start, now that I was conscious of it, I was able to start applying it in a little organization where I was working, and then eventually, moving over with Simon. And now this is my life's work, to help other, organizations create these environments where people show up because they want to, not because they have to. And so I don't know if it's egotistical to say, but my own story has really changed my life,
And I don't think it's egotistical. I mean, I think, first of all, I think ego plays an important part in what we do. I mean, but sharing our story, I don't think is wrong at all. Especially when you see the changes in it like that, going from just a job, as you said, with air quotes there, to your life's work. I like how you said, this is my life's work. That's awesome, David. How do you think about story then when you're giving a presentation? Like you said earlier, I don't want to just facts and figures and brain science. That's helpful. But what kind of preparation do you go into when you're thinking about those stories? Do you gather a bunch? Do you just write it out? Do you practice it? What kind of prep work do you go into?
It's a little bit of all of that. I mean, I think, just with my personality type and the type of person that I am, I'm very organized. And so I go in with, a plan. And so I've done some research. I've looked at some stories ahead of time. But the cool thing about doing the work that I do is, like, almost everywhere that I go, there is a story that pops out, of an experience or a workshop or, an interaction that I have with somebody after a talk, or, a comment that somebody makes, or just all of these things that, some of them are short, some of them are a little bit longer, but there's always something that sort of adds to my bank of stories that I can always draw from. And so, while I do have a few go-tos that I use, in talks and workshops and that kind of stuff, it's always interesting to see sort of what pops up and what just kind of flies into my mind, in the moment. Because after 7 or 8 years of doing this, it's just kind of what happens.
So you mentioned a bank of stories. How do you make that deposit? We'll keep with that metaphor. How do you make that deposit regularly and remember what's in there? How do those things come to mind? Do you have any particular tricks to help people kind of remember those stories that you hear all the time?
Yeah. So and this is something that I try not to tell myself, and I'm trying to figure out a different way to say it, but my memory is not great. So, some people just have the ability to just produce these stories for any situation or any example. They can, naturally pop out with a story. I have a really hard time doing that. So, a couple of things that I do, I have in the journaling app that I use, I have a specific, folder that is just for stories and experiences or anecdotes or things that I can pull in. And so I review that from time to time. We have on our team, I'm one of a few igniters, which are the guys and gals who go out and do the speaking and workshops and that kind of stuff. So, every once in a while we'll get on a Zoom call or we'll Voxer with each other and say, hey, if we had an experience or we have a story or something that we want to share with others, we do it that way too. So we kind of powwow a little bit that way. Comes from, I'm not a huge reader either, just because I don't make the time for it. But whenever I read a book that has a good story in it, a lot of times will just encapsulate that story and tell it if it, where it applies. And so it's just different ways of making deposits into that bank account. I usually just have to keep the ledger in front of me so I can see what those are, because I have a hard time remembering well.
Amen to that. So journaling is a big one for you. You mentioned a journaling app. Do you think there's a difference between writing, actually like writing with a pen or a pencil, versus typing? Do you find anything either one works better for you?
For me, I'm like zero paper guy. That's just what works for me. And of course I know that there are, studies and the ideas out there that if you actually physically write something down, it sticks with you better, which may be the case. The problem is, if I were to do that, I would just never look at the notebook again. So it would be a little counterproductive for me.
I hear that. So you talked earlier about connecting with your son and connecting with audiences as well. So storytelling, connecting is what you love about it. But is there something that you, David, love particularly about telling stories? Is there something that you get out of that besides the connecting?
I think the connecting is the biggest piece, but I think what happens for me is because I tell, like I said, I have sort of the standard go-tos that I have that are part of my talks or my workshops. And because I tell them so much, sometimes I get tired of telling them. And so it forces me to look for new examples and new stories, because otherwise I don't want it to come across, because I believe and I love so much what I do. I never want it to come across like I'm tired of it or like I've said it 500 times. Right. So the thing that I love about telling these stories over and over and over again is that it pushes me to keep looking for new stories, because when that one feels like it's getting tired for me, like I got to have something else to go to. So in sort of a meta sort of way, it helps me to deepen my learning and my understanding of the content that I'm talking about. Because when I can draw from a new story and bring that in, then there are nuances and little pieces of that story that might deepen my understanding of the content that story is relating to, if that makes sense. So in a way, it helps me to, understand what I'm talking about better, and therefore hopefully be able to relay more depth and more value or more understanding to those that I'm working with.
Yeah. So that familiarity can be something that pushes you, but also something that keeps you on your guard, and you don't want to get over familiar with your stories. That makes sense.
Sure.
Yeah. Do you think that's one of the biggest challenges with storytelling too? Is that familiarity, or is something like what's one of your biggest challenges when it comes to storytelling?
My biggest challenge with storytelling is I am a very sort of concise and to the point person. So when it drives my wife crazy. Like, if I go, have lunch with somebody or, whatever, and I come back and she wants to know how it went, I will literally give her like the 2-sentence answer, right? Like all the details, like, yeah, he's fine. He's doing great. Kids are good. we had a nice lunch, right? And she's like, dude, like details, like tell me what you talked about. Like, what is he feeling? How's his wife? What are they eating? And all this stuff. She wants to know all these things. So my biggest challenge is sort of allowing the time to sort of stretch out the story, give the details, paint the picture, help people feel like they're there. Really, again, it goes back to that connecting piece. And I feel like I just sort of want to get on to the next thing. And so my challenge is like, how do I make it really meaningful and tell a story, not just to tell a story because it's a buzzword and everybody, you know, is talking about storytelling, but how do I use it to actually help them, you know, connect or really understand the message that I'm trying to convey through that story.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. You mentioned telling stories, being verbal, talking to your wife. Kind of makes you want to tell her, well, come to lunch with me next time. You can hear it, right? You can experience it. But so I hear you say that you talk quite a bit. You obviously are a speaker and a coach, this kind of thing. You're, I mentioned in my intro that you are a content creator, so that encapsulates a lot of things. Obviously, a co-writer with Simon. Do you have a favorite platform, a favorite way to tell stories? Do any of those kind of make you go, oh, I can't wait to get out of bed and go do this?
I think the place that it comes out most naturally is in speaking and the content creation. So that happens, those are sort of separate but simultaneous. So like, for example, I just wrote a new talk, which I gave for the first time this last week. And so I had the opportunity to incorporate some new stories again to help with the learning of that content. Also on the writing front, so that, you know, another platform is, you know, every month I write an article that gets posted on LinkedIn around a certain topic that we're focusing on for the month here at Start With Why. And so again, another opportunity to share a story. And the thing that I love about it is because it's something that doesn't necessarily come naturally for me. But I love that I'm getting the opportunity to sort of be pushed, to not to have to do it because I want to do it and I want to do it better. Yeah. But to be able to have some of those platforms to sort of push myself out of my comfort zone and to work on, you know, not just coming up with a short example, but how do I, you know, use that story and really, to really bring people in and help them to connect again with the content.
Yeah. So I love the idea of helping people find their why. And I was thinking of a way to incorporate that into this conversation, because I've read a couple of Simon's books. I've seen him speak. I watched some of your videos and so I've seen you speak now. And I love the message. I love the mission behind it all. And I was thinking, man, how do we inspire listeners to find their why? You know, I can picture somebody sitting in their car, listening to the Storytellers Network, thinking, well, I'm kind of doing that a little bit, but you know, I really want to do something different. So let me give you a chance to kind of talk a little bit about Start With Why and what that means to you and how you might inspire somebody with that. So I'm just going to kind of open it up to you with the idea that somebody might be sitting there thinking, I want to do that, but I don't know where to start. So tell a little bit of a story about maybe either a success or somebody else, but just kind of let yourself think about a story on what that means to you and the world around you, starting with why.
Sure. So, you know, if you think about it, your why is really the ultimate story. Like it is the story of you. So for those who may not be familiar with the idea, basically Simon Sinek codified this idea of purpose, which has been around for thousands of years, obviously. But he codified it into a simple model called the golden circle, which is basically a bullseye with 3 words: why in the center where the bullseye is, and then how in the middle ring, and then what on the outer ring. The idea or the premise is that every organization and even our own careers or whatever it is that keeps us busy throughout the day revolves around these 3 things: what we do, how we do it, and why we do it. And everybody knows what they do. Some people know how they do what they do, but very few people actually know why. And why is not to, you know, make more money or climb a corporate ladder or, you know, be able to travel the world when we retire. Like those are all results. By why, we mean it's a noun. It's not a question, right? Your why is your purpose. It's your just cause. It's your belief. It's the thing that inspires you to get out of bed every day. It's really the contribution that you make and the impact that you have on the lives of the people around you, right? And so a lot of us get up every day. We go to work. We might like our jobs. We might love our jobs. We might hate our jobs. You know, we might go to school. We, you know, if we're a stay-at-home parent, whatever it is, like we know what we do. And sometimes we get stuck in the rut of what that is. And so, you know, passion goes down, stress goes up, and we start doing those things because we have to, not because we want to. Mm-hmm. And what the why can really do is just to lend a new perspective, or a sort of a shift our perception and give some context and meaning to what we do. It's not necessarily our job or what we do every day, or the major that we're in, or whatever it is that we're doing has to change. But when we clearly understand the purpose behind it, or the bigger picture around it, that's what gives it really meaning and fulfillment. And it's not that we're not going to have bad days, not that we're going to, never have challenges. It's that when we do, we have that broader context. So that's kind of what the idea is. And it's amazing. And a couple of stories that pop into my mind are of individuals who have come up to me, after a why discovery workshop. And we do a lot of these within organizations where individual employees are essentially given the opportunity to find their purpose and to articulate why they do what they do, and to, find out really what inspires them. And I remember I did a workshop in Australia for a group, and I got a message on LinkedIn from one of the organizers who was in that workshop, and she listed off, the names of about 6 or 7 different people who were in that workshop that came to her and told her what a difference that had made in their life. Like, one guy, he said, my why really helped. My wife's battling cancer, and my why just gave me a whole new perspective on that. This other person was promoted because they went into an interview starting with why. Like, all of these things. The coolest, one of the other really cool ones, a couple of weeks ago, we had a firefighter write in, and he said, read your book, discovered my why, and I totally rewrote my resume based on some of your principles. And he was going for a promotion in the fire department. I can't remember what the exact position was, but it was a decently high position within his fire department. He said, I got the job. Just wanted to let you know how grateful I am for, this new perspective that I have. And so it's the story of who we are at our natural best. And when we can show up in situations and make that contribution, or have that impact that we naturally have when we're at our best, we're more likely to inspire those around us. We're more likely to have passion and excitement for the work that we're doing, which naturally ends up in greater results, more money if that's what we're looking for, better position at work, leadership opportunities, whatever it is that we're looking for. But that can only come when we show up at our natural best. And that's really what the why helps us to do.
So I heard you say something in there that I always think about this when we're talking about why. And we had this experience at my last company that I was at, a mortgage company, and we have this thing in Kalamazoo, Michigan called Catalyst University. And we talk about Simon's talk, and of course that TEDx talk is the golden circle. That's been the biggest thing for him, I think, that started a lot of this. Mm-hmm. And we all watched it. We read the book, and we started this group within our company because so many of us thought after Catalyst University, after seeing Simon's talk and learning about the why, like, we all kind of went, why are we working for a mortgage company? Can't we do something different? we need to all quit and go like volunteer in, the Peace Corps or something, like this greater calling. And then we all went, wait a minute. We can't quit our jobs. Let's figure out our why here with what we do. So what I heard you say, David, is that you don't have to quit your job and turn your life upside down. You can find your why, find your purpose, find that best you, and apply that where you are. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the greatest stories that exemplifies that, I think, because what you initially thought is what so many people think. And this is the reason that most organizations did not want us to come in and do this work with them at first, because they thought, well, if my people find their why, they're all going to quit. Right? Because we're, I don't know, some unglamorous manufacturing company. Nobody's going to want to do that. If they know their purpose, they're going to want to go, do charity work for the rest of their life. And that's not it at all. Right? So there's the famous story of when NASA, I think, was first formed, and I think it was, I don't think it was JFK. It was, who was his vice president?
Johnson? Lyndon Johnson?
Yes, I think it was Lyndon Johnson. So he went down to NASA to, meet some of the engineers and scientists and folks down there. And as the story goes, there was just a lineup of people, these rocket scientists and, really kind of people that were high up doing a lot of important work at NASA. And he was going down the line, sort of handshaking with everybody and, figuring out what do they do and what's their role and all this stuff. And he came to the end of the line, And there was this guy in this NASA jacket, and I think, again, President Johnson, I'm not sure, but he said, and what do you do here? And he said, I'm the janitor, and I'm helping to put a man on the moon. And he's like, what? He's like, well, if I don't keep this place clean, then the scientists can't do their work. And if they can't do their work, then we, on up and up and up and up and up. Mm-hmm. And basically we can't put a man on the moon if, I'm not doing my job. And so no matter where we are, no matter what our role is, we can still show up and live our why, which is all about how we interact with human beings. It's the service that we give. It's the difference that we make in the lives of people. And we can do that no matter what job we're in, no matter what industry we're in, no matter what position in the company that we hold.
I love that idea. And I've said it much less intelligently. Like when I'm talking about the work that we do at the company that I work at Interview Valet, and the podcast, the Storytellers Network, and the volunteer work that I've done, I think, man, I'm making such a difference, and I love that. I love changing the world around me. But I said it this way, you can be folding tacos at Taco Bell and still work with a passion and a purpose that that you're giving someone else that fuel for food to change the world, and you can still be happy with where you are.
Totally. Yeah.
I just love that idea. So thank you for the work you're doing. I love it.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Don't mean to fanboy, but that's awesome stuff. So David, what do you if you think about storytelling and all these different, I ask you about platforms and about speaking and stages, this kind of thing, but we also have this digital stage, obviously today, social media. And you hear some people kind of just, all social media is the bane of our existence. Twitter made us all dumber because of fewer characters. Facebook is ruining it with, fake news or scams or whatever, and blah, blah, blah. So there are its pros and cons. I know that. But how do you think that storytelling has been affected by social media? Do you notice it for you or the craft in general? Has it affected it over the last couple of years?
Yeah, I think the thing that strikes me the most is it's what social media, I think, has done is just give us a different set of outlets for our stories, right? One of the things I love most about Instagram is you tell a story through a picture, right? You might give a comment or two, but like if you're really thoughtful about the photos that you post, we all know the silly saying, a picture's worth 1,000 words, right? So it's given us an opportunity to do that. I think, there are pros and cons to everything, but I think the pros to Twitter are it's made us more thoughtful about what are we actually saying, and is every word, what's the importance of every word or every character we put in there. So I think you can look at everything both ways, but I think and storytelling is like the oldest tradition that we have. It's how we have passed along our culture and our beliefs and those kind of things through time. It's never going to go away. And the way that we do it is just morphing and changing a little bit. But I think the biggest thing for me is what are the important lessons? What is the core message that we're passing along, whether that be through, a short Twitter post or through a LinkedIn article or through a photo on Instagram? Doesn't really matter what it is, but what are we trying to teach? What are we trying to pass along? What are we trying to impart? What are we trying to give? I think if we can go into it with an attitude of giving something, sharing something, rather than doing it just to have ourselves be heard or to just give our opinion about something, because I think on the other end of the spectrum, one thing that social media allows people to do is just to say whatever they want without consequence, right? Mm-hmm. So I think we have to be really intentional and really giving in our expression of stories in those different media, and just think to ourselves, what am I trying to share? What do I want to give to the people around me? Sourced from my own why, right? Whatever I'm trying to inspire other people with, how can I do that through the stories that I tell in the different ways that I tell them?
I heard you say give a number of times in that. Have you always been a giver?
Yes. I've been more conscious of it, I would say, the last few years. Obviously not perfect at it, right? We all have our selfish side. We all screw up sometimes, but yeah, that's just, and it's interesting because every time before I go on stage, I will literally remind myself, show up to give. Like, I'm not here to, wow the audience, so hopefully they'll hire me again. I'm not here to, hopefully make some connection or get some referral for another piece of, I don't care about any of that stuff. As soon as I step on that stage, it's like, what of myself, of my experience, of my knowledge, of the things that I'm learning can I share and give to those around me. So yeah.
Do you think being a dad has affected that in some way?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's funny because we talk a lot about leadership, and, Simon makes a correlation between leadership and parenting, which I think is just fantastic. And I can speak to that from personal experience that, and it's ridiculous. Like, it's silly how it's instinctive. And maybe it's supposed to be, but like, it doesn't matter how hungry I am. I will always make my kids' plate of food first. Right? I'll make sure they're eating first. I'll make sure they're comfortable, they're warm, they're cool, whatever they need. Like, I'll make sure they have that first at my own personal sacrifice, just because that's what parents do. And so it consistently reinforces that giving mindset, for sure.
What else has those 8-year-old eyes, or before that, obviously, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. What have those little eyes taught you about your professional world and storytelling and everything? How has that rocked your world?
The thing, I mean, my son is 8, my daughter just turned 2. So, I've had a little bit more time to learn from my son, but I think the thing that and it's, personal and professional is very blurred for me. It's life. And, some of that time I spend at home and some of that time I spend at work. But what I've learned from him is he has this incredible ability to forgive me very quickly when I'm a jerk, which happens from time to time. Right.
Yes.
And so the way that I sort of translate that into how I'm doing it is, he's very generous in his thoughts. And just because I've done something to upset him or hurt him or, annoy him, whatever it is, like, he's very quick to replace that with all of the good things that I do and to get back to that place. And so one of the things that I've, sort of, and it's forming my own story at work now, which is, when I think something of a colleague or of a client or somebody in my audience who's not, engaged or whatever it is, it's, how do I essentially forgive them? How do I be generous to them? How do I kind of meet them where they are, which is one of my values of, like, instead of being all high and mighty and you're not paying attention or you're not engaged or you're doing this thing that I don't like. It's like, what's going on with you? Are you okay? Like, how can I get to the same level as you so that we can understand each other and maybe I can give you what you need rather than what I think you need.
Extending grace, right? Abounding grace. From
exactly.
Kids,
Yep.
I have 2 daughters, 12 and 13. And so same thing, man. It's incredible, their capacity to just look past it. Such a great lesson. I love that. All right. So let's get back to storytelling. How do you think in today's noisy world, social media, we just talked about a minute ago, has great reach and has a great opportunity. So that's one way. But how do you think a storyteller can get their word out today? You've been fortunate, obviously, to be able to speak around the world and to use your platform. You mentioned LinkedIn earlier, for writing for LinkedIn once a month. So you get your story out there, but it's still a battle, I would imagine. How are we supposed to do it nowadays?
Wow. I think the beauty of technology is that, like, anybody can do it, right? It's kind of like, so the way that I sort of compare it to is, it used to be like, if you didn't have a job, like, it was hard. You had to go out and, like, apply for a job. You had to look at different companies. You have to do all this stuff. And now you just, like, get in your car and you drive Lyft or Uber. Like, instantly you have a job. And it's like, you don't even necessarily, anybody can do it. Right. And so it's the same thing sort of with storytelling. Like, anybody can start a blog. Anybody can have a podcast. Anybody can have social media accounts. Anybody can do this stuff. And I think it's just a matter of, consistency, which is something, again, that's tough for me and it's tough for everybody. We're all busy. But consistency, and also just, I guess the things that I think about are consistency, simplicity, making sure that you have a very simple message to tell. And this is why I think I resonate so much with Simon's stuff, and why I was so drawn to him at the beginning. And then just taking, I think one other important element of storytelling is to take something that, like, there are no new ideas really, if you think about it, but to take something that we sort of already know or that we hear all the time And how do we reframe it into a way that we haven't thought of before? I think those things, I think anybody can do. And if you can just lend a different perspective or a different way of thinking to something that, you're not going to, and not everybody's going to gravitate to that. Not everybody's going to be interested in your thought process, which is okay. Again, the point is not to, reach everybody who we think needs what we have. The goal is to reach people who believe what we believe and who share, the interests and the things that we have to share. So I think those three things, and just picking, one or two platforms that work. That's one thing with me with social media too. Like, I don't use Facebook. I haven't probably for 7 years just because I couldn't keep up with it. Right. Mm-hmm. And I think we have to be, I have to be for myself very deliberate about what social media I use. So I don't use a ton. I use like Instagram and Twitter, and that's about it. And I could be more consistent at both. Right. Mm-hmm. But pick one or two things and really just focus on those and tell the story in a simple way that, relates to other people. And it gives a bit of a reframe of something that we already know.
Yeah. And I heard you saying there, focus and consistency and being better at it, being purposeful, I would say. Is there an element of being real and transparent and not always, I'm thinking of like writers or personal brand type folks, right? Well, I have to be very purposeful. I can't let down my guard. There's got to be an element of transparency too, don't you think?
Absolutely. If you ever hope to build any kind of trust or relationship with people, you gotta be you, right? Mm-hmm. And I think this is, again, one of the things that I really appreciate about the team that I work on. And the things that I like to read the most are from people who are willing to admit their own mistakes, who are willing to, tell me where they screwed up and where they've learned something. Like, we all know nobody's perfect, right? I mean, it's like you hire somebody to come over to do some electrical work at your house, and they say, and you go, oh, I actually also have a bit of a plumbing issue. I got some drywall stuff. I got crown molding I need to do, all this. Oh, yeah. You know what? I'm awesome at all of that. I can do all of that stuff. Just let me do it all. How much do we trust that guy versus the guy that comes in and says, you know what? I rock at electrical. I've done some plumbing. Do not hire me for your drywall. I will completely screw it up. We trust that person so much more. So rather than putting up this front that people know is not true and being, lying, faking, and hiding behind who we think we need to be for everybody, I think there's great value in letting people in a little bit. So
on that note of transparency and failures, you got to know this one's coming. What's one of your biggest moments of, just facepalm, I can't believe that happened, that you were fortunate enough to learn from? What's one of your kind of biggest, oh crap moments?
About a year and a half ago, I had been in this role, speaking workshops, that kind of stuff, for about 5 or 6 years. Right. And I had, I've learned a lot from the very beginning, but I got to the point where I sort of plateaued, and I let myself get into this mindset of like, I made it, right? Like, I'm comfortable. I can do all the content with my eyes closed. Like, I'm, got a nice house. I'm making good money. Like, I made it. And at that point I stopped growing. And at that point I stopped being of any value to anybody else on our team. And I was just sort of starting to suck energy from people rather than giving it. I got called out on it, and they were like, you're being lazy, and you're basically just, you're on vacation, and you need to step it up because you've got a lot more to give. And I knew it, but I just let myself get into that comfort zone, and I was like, I'm good, but I wasn't. And I was feeling it myself. Right. And so I did the hard work, still doing the hard work of continuing to, show up every day. But that's the first one that pops to mind, but I've got all kinds of little stuff. And I mean, if you want to talk personal relationships, with family and whatever, like, I'm full of those things. I screw up every day.
It's hard, isn't it? The people business is messy.
Yeah.
Well, and how fortunate for you, David, that you have that team around you that's willing to call you out. You have that trust with them that they can do that and say, man, look, and that they care about you enough. They, dare I say, love you enough to say, man, you've got more to give. Like, that was such a great, you've got more to give, more to grow. That's what I heard from that. That's awesome, man.
Yeah. And I think that's where and it's all, we know that's always where it comes from, is from a place of love, because we have, again, going to the bank account, we're always making deposits in that bank account, so that when we need to make that withdrawal and we need to say, dude, we need to have a hard conversation, like the balance is still to the point where even if you're going to withdraw a couple $100, like we're still good. Like I still know that love is there, that trust is there, and you're just doing it because you want to help me get better. And I think, yeah, I take it for granted, but I'm so lucky to be on a team like that.
And how did you find yourself in the middle of that? Did you purposefully surround yourself with people that you knew could do that? Does it just kind of work out as you find your why? I mean, if I'm sitting here all kind of alone as a storyteller, or as just anybody listening in general, like, how do you build that around you?
Well, I think the first thing that sort of discovering and articulating your why or your purpose will do for you is to help you recognize what you value most, the characteristics, the attributes, the behaviors, and those kind of things that make you who you are at your best. And you'll want to surround yourself with other people who share those same values. So even if you don't go through the effort of articulating it, when you're around certain people, whether they are feeding you or sucking the life out of you, right? If you feel like they're energizing you, they're inspiring you, like those are more the type of people you need to be around. If you have people in your life who just like you get done talking to them and you just need to go take a nap, like those are probably the people who maybe you need to figure out a way to spend less time with. And that sometimes is really hard, because sometimes those are, air quotes, best friends. Those are colleagues. Those are family members. And it's tough. I don't have the answers of exactly how to do that best. Everybody's situation is a little bit different, but rather than trying to keep, we just get an awareness of who we need to be around, and maybe we focus a little bit more of our time and attention around those people who inspire us and who we have sort of that two-way inspiring relationship with. And that's the first thing. Then we can start making decisions when we know our values, when we know what's important to us. We can choose to do things throughout the day or not that will, again, feed that inspiration within us and help us to show up and be better. So I've forgotten your original question.
How did you surround yourself with such great people?
Oh, yeah.
I guess, right?
So we can be intentional about it, and sort of pick and choose based on who we know who we are and what we need to be at our best. So that's one way to do it. The way that I sort of, I don't want to say fell into it, but and if we're part of an organization like I am, where we are intentionally hiring people who share common values and beliefs, that's less in our control, obviously, but that's where I find myself, is the only people that make it onto the Start With Why team are people who share our values and beliefs. That doesn't mean that we're not different people. We are wildly different people, in political views and religious backgrounds and, all kinds of experiences and thought process and all these things. We don't all have to be the same there, but we're very, very careful as to who we let into our tribe, essentially. And so a couple of ways we can do that, but again, control what you can control. If you don't have control over who gets hired into your organization or who you surround yourself with at work, you absolutely do have control over who you surround yourself with otherwise.
Mm-hmm. And I kind of heard a kernel in there too from you. I want to pull out is pour into others too, right? You don't want to surround yourself with a bunch of vampires, but you don't want to be one as well. So that self-awareness and pouring into others, right? Yeah.
It's, it's sort of, Simon gave me a sort of a reframe on what a mentor-mentee relationship might be like. And a lot of times we think of it in that way of, what can I give this person? But if I'm constantly giving, then I'm going to run out. Right. But if, I'm getting something from that person and I'm not giving anything, then they don't get any benefit out of it either. So rather than having mentor-mentee, his idea is mentor-mentor, right? We can all learn something from each other. And so figuring out, it's not, it doesn't matter how much experience I have, doesn't matter what I've done, doesn't matter what you've done. We can learn something from everyone. And so not going into it thinking I'm the mentor, but I'm also the one who's being mentored by somebody else. And I think, just understanding that we have that sort of symbiotic relationship with other people is another thing that we can do to inspire ourselves and inspire those around us.
It's funny because as someone who looks for mentors, that really hit me hard that And I thought of this. I had a conversation with my friend Tom, who owns Interview Valet, and it was actually during an interview for Storytellers Network. And I called him a mentor, and he said, "I'm uncomfortable with that term because you mentor me as much as you think I mentor you." And I thought, man, so that's you just hit me with that, David. That's good. It's kind of pouring into others to just make. I mean, just like as kumbaya or as goofy as it sounds, is to make the world a better place, right?
Right.
I love that. I also love what you said about making it. You felt like you made it, and you just kind of sat back, kicked back, and said, "Yeah, the heck with it, I'm good." Just one of the questions I like to ask people is, when did you kind of feel like you made it? What was a milestone? But making it sound so negative in that connotation. What do you think a positive outlook to making it might look like for you instead moving forward?
I think there's always something, like there's always sort of a micro piece that I'm working on in the macro, right? So for the rest of my life, I will never think I've made it. There's always more to learn. There's always more to share, always more room to grow. But the thing that I'm working on this week, for example, that I, by the way, have been working on for the last 4 years, still not there yet, right? But when I master that, I'll be like, sweet, I made it. And it's sort of like going to the gym, right? Like you go to the gym and you get in shape. You're not done. You have to keep going to the gym to stay in shape. And so it's once I've sort of made it, quote unquote, with this thing that I'm working on, or this, goal that I have, or this objective that I've been working toward, it becomes easier to do it because I'm not, I've sort of mastered it, if you will, but I have to keep doing it. And so it's just that awareness of when I've made it in terms of those small things in service of the lifelong, learning and lifelong journey that I'm on.
Lifelong learning. That's good. Don't stop learning. Man, I could sit here for hours and talk with you, David. I won't do that to you though, or the listeners. So thank you so much for your time today. I want to get to my big question. This is my favorite thing to ask, and I don't know what my answer would be. So I hope you have one. Good luck. If you were told all of a sudden you can only tell one last story and you're done being a storyteller, what would that story be for you?
I struggle with this question too. It's so final. I think the story that I would end with would be the story of the last thing that really was an aha for me, whatever that is. Because if it's something that hit me that hard that it, really made a difference to me, I know it could be powerful and helpful to somebody else.
Your most recent aha. I like that. Mm-hmm. That's good. That's good, David. Well, thank you, man. Thank you for your time today. Thanks for sharing with the Storytellers Network listeners a little bit about your story and how it affects what you do with Start With Why. I think it's amazing. And just for being here, man, I really appreciate it.
You got it. Thank you, Dan.
Where can people find you? What's the easiest way to connect with Mr. David Mead?
So easiest place is probably startwithwhy.com. Y is spelled out, WHY. I'm also on Instagram at Igniter DM, and on Twitter at DJ Mead.
We'll put those in the show notes so people can connect with you. And yeah, man. Hey, just one last time, man. Thank you very much for your time today.
You're welcome. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you to our guest, David Mead from Start With Why. Be sure to visit him online. You can find those links down in the show notes. And if you enjoyed the episode, please consider sharing it all over the place. Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, email it, text it, wherever you can send it to somebody and bless them with a story. I do appreciate it. In fact, let's also talk about how else to bless people, right? Leaving us a review. Thank you so much for the reviews that we have there on the Storytellers Network. And here's one from the host of Legends and Losers podcast, marketing legend himself, Christopher Lockhead. He says, compelling stories can change the world. In this insightful podcast, Dan and his guests unpack the elements of a great story while telling great stories. Thank you, Dan. And that's all caps. So, man, that's my hope. Compelling guests, stories, and inspiration. Maybe we're changing worlds after all. Thank you, Christopher. And if we've changed your world in some way, please let me know. You can leave a review sharing how that's happened for you, or send me a note through the website I do appreciate it, and I look forward to reading those stories. So, and thanks again, Mr. Christopher Lockhead. Appreciate you taking time for that, Christopher. Thanks again for listening. I appreciate you listening in your car, maybe while you work, while you walk, wherever you are. Until next time, here's to telling stories and having those stories to tell. Cheers.